The candle bent sideways before the flame caught, and for one sharp second, I had the foolish urge to shield it with both hands, like I could still protect something in this house from going out too soon. I stood there in my daughter's room with a little white cake balanced on the dresser, the wick finally burning steady, and the silence around me felt so practiced it made my chest ache. Not loud ache, not the kind that throws a woman to the floor, the kind that learns your habits and lives in them, the kind that waits beside folded blankets, unopened curtains, and a bed no child had slept in for over a year. Layla would have turned 13 that morning. I still set the cake down the same way every year. Small, plain, one candle, no singing. I had learned early that grief hated performance. It preferred ritual. Then her room looked exactly as she had left it the week she disappeared on her way home from school. Books lined up crooked on the shelf, the framed photo from her school recital angled slightly inward. The pale yellow sweater she used to claim was too grown for her still hanging behind the closet door. I had not touched any of it. I told people it was because I believed she was coming back. The truth was uglier than that. Some part of me had been too afraid that if I moved one thing, I would be admitting she belonged to memory now. I lit the candle and watched the flame shake once before settling. "Happy birthday, baby," I said, and even to my own ears my voice sounded careful, managed, like I was trying not to wake something sleeping inside me. Preston had already left for the farm before sunrise. He had kissed my cheek in the kitchen. I told me he was going to be busy out on the far field most of the morning and asked if I wanted anything brought back from town later. His tone had been easy, familiar, the tone of a man who had spent years learning how to move through a marriage without disturbing the furniture of it. I stared at the candle another minute, then blew it out before the wax could run too far. That was when the thought came back. Go to the farm. Not because he asked me to. Preston rarely asked me to come there anymore. In the early years of our marriage, he used to mention it now and then, lightly, almost politely. Over time, that changed. He never forbade it. Men like him know better than to leave fingerprints on control. He just made it easier not to come. Too hot out there. Too dusty. Nothing for you to do but get bored. You hate the smell after it rains. To stay in town where you're comfortable. He said those things with a smile, and after enough years, a woman can start mistaking exclusion for consideration. I almost didn't go. That should have been enough. Instead, I took one last look around Layla's room, picked up my keys, and walked out before I could argue with myself. The drive should have taken 40 minutes. It felt like twice that. I kept the radio off. The road stretched ahead of me in long, dry ribbons, and every mile seemed to strip something warm out of the morning. By the time I turned onto the private road leading to the farmhouse, the unease had settled low in my stomach with a weight I could not explain. No workers, no tractor noise, no cattle shifting in the distance, no insects buzzing against the heat. Even the wind felt absent, alike the property had been placed under glass. My name is Thelma Varell, and if you're listening to me right now, tell me what time it is, where you are. Maybe it's late. Maybe you should be asleep. I only know that if you've ever kept peace in your home by swallowing a feeling you should have respected, then you already know why my hands were tight on that steering wheel by then. I parked near the house and sat for a moment without opening the door. The farmhouse looked exactly as it should have from a distance. Fresh paint, trimmed hedges, clean porch, not one loose board in sight. Maintained, orderly, quiet. Preston's truck was there, parked where it always was when he was working the far end of the field. The engine was cold, but the side gate beyond the house stood open. That stopped me. Preston never left that gate open unless he was moving between sections of the property. I stood there, one hand still on the steering wheel, listening. No machinery, no radio, no distant movement. Just distance itself, stretched wide enough to hide a man in it. I told myself he was out there, that he hadn't heard me pull in, that I had time. When I stepped onto the porch, the boards didn't even creak. I opened the front door and walked inside. The first thing that hit me was not fear. It was the feeling that somebody had prepared the place to be seen. It wasn't just unfamiliar, it felt edited. I stood just inside the doorway with one hand still near the knob, waiting for the room to correct itself. Sometimes a place will look wrong for a second if you arrive carrying too much feeling into it. I told myself that was all this was. On a bad morning. A birthday. An old ache reaching too far into the present. But the longer I stood there, the less the house felt like my husband's farmhouse, and the more it felt like a version of one. Clean enough to pass, careful enough to satisfy a glance, empty in all the places that make a place belong to actual people. The living room held furniture, but no life. The sofa was straight, the cushions centered, the coffee table bare except for a square wooden tray with nothing in it but a coaster and a folded newspaper from 3 days earlier. No reading glasses, no half-drunk coffee, no receipts, no jacket thrown over a chair, not one careless thing. Preston was neat by habit, but not like this. This looked less like discipline and more like removal. I walked farther in. The walls gave me my next answer. No family photos. Not one. Not our wedding picture. Not the framed portrait of Layla at 10, with the missing front tooth she had hated, and I had loved, because it made her smile look honest. Not even an old photograph of Preston with my late husband from back when they still called each other brothers in everything but blood. The walls were decorated. Yes, landscapes. A clock. 2 pieces of metalwork hung with perfect spacing, but nothing personal. Nothing that could accuse a man of belonging to anybody but himself. A strange coldness moved through me then. Not panic, not yet, but the kind of chill that comes when your mind notices something before it lets you name it. I crossed into the kitchen. Same thing. It was spotless, but not in the lived-in way I knew from my own house. My kitchen at home could be tidy and still carry traces of me. And a spoon drying near the sink. Tea bags in the wrong drawer because I was always telling myself I would organize them properly later. Here, everything looked returned. The counters had been wiped too clean. The dish rack was empty. The trash can held almost nothing. I opened the refrigerator and found bottled water, condiments, eggs, a package of deli meat, and fruit that looked too untouched to be close to spoiling. Enough food to suggest use. Not enough signs of meals to prove it. I closed it gently and stood there listening. Still nothing. Not a floorboard overhead. Not a back door shutting in the distance. Not the hum of a television left on in another room. Just the low sound of the refrigerator motor and my own breathing starting to feel too loud. Upstairs, the bedroom was worse. I knew immediately that no woman had been expected there in a long time. The bed was made with military corners, the dresser nearly bare, the closet holding mostly Preston's things with space hanging beside them like a statement. No scarf of mine forgotten on a hook, no slippers tucked under the chair, no lotion bottle, no trace of softness that had not been deliberately chosen for display. It did not look like a room shared by husband and wife. It looked like a room maintained by a man who wanted the appearance of order without the inconvenience of witness. I told myself I was reacting to grief. I told myself Layla's birthday had sharpened every edge in me and made ordinary things feel loaded. That was the explanation I offered my own body as I came back downstairs and noticed the hall off the main room seemed longer than I remembered. 2 doors stood on the left. One opened onto a linen closet. The other, farther down, stayed shut. At the end of the hall sat a heavier door with a newer lock than the rest of the house wore. Storage, I thought. Equipment, maybe. Feed records. Something practical. Something I had no business making dramatic. Still, I noticed I did not remember that lock. To the right of the hall, tucked under a window, was a narrow writing desk I was almost certain had not always been there. It was too elegant for the rest of the farmhouse, dark wood with slim brass handles and a leather blotter laid perfectly across the center. The surface was nearly empty, a closed ledger, a lamp, and a fountain pen placed so neatly beside the ledger it looked less forgotten than positioned. I reached for it before I had any reason to. The pen was heavier than I expected, black lacquer with a gold clip cool against my fingers. For 1 second, I only stared at it, because something about it was already scratching at memory before my thumb turned it slightly in the light. Then the engraving caught. Layla Virel. That pen didn't just belong to her, it disappeared the day she did. For a moment I forgot where I was. The desk, the locked door down the hall, the strange emptiness of the house, all of it dropped away, and all I could see was Layla at the dining table, 2 birthdays earlier, elbows planted where I had told her 100 times not to put them, grinning down at a velvet box like her father had just handed her the moon, and he had given it to her on the morning of her 11th birthday. Not Preston, her father. I still remembered the way he had looked the day he brought it home, tired from treatment but determined to sit upright through breakfast because he had decided that sickness was not going to steal ordinary joy from our child before it stole anything else from him. He had the box tucked behind his back when Layla came into the kitchen in her socks, dragging that yellow blanket she had refused to let go of for years. When he told her to close her eyes, she cheated and peeked through one lid. He pretended not to notice. That was his way, gentle enough to let a child keep her little dishonesty if it made her happy. "It's too grown for me," she had said first, because the pen was black and gold and serious looking. I'd the kind of thing adults keep in breast pockets and sign hard documents with. "You'll grow into it," he told her. He had already had her name engraved on it. Layla Virel, clean lettering, elegant, permanent. She turned it over 3 times in her hand, then asked if that meant nobody else could steal it because it had her name on it. He laughed so softly then. I heard that laugh in my sleep for months after he died. By afternoon, she was using the pen to sign the bottom of a birthday card she had made for him, pressing too hard because she was still learning how fountain pens moved. Ink smudged across the side of her hand. He kissed the top of her head and told her important things left a mark. The day she vanished, that pen vanished too. And I remembered noticing, because I had gone into her room that first night after the police left, and the house had turned into the kind of place where people lowered their voices even when they were alone. Her backpack had been recovered. One shoe had not. Her lunch container was missing. The pen case from her dresser drawer stood open and empty. At the time, it meant nothing. Children lose things. Panic sorts value badly. You do not stop a search for your daughter to mourn an object, even an object touched by a dead man's hands. But standing there in that farmhouse with the pen resting in my palm, I felt the shape of the years rearrange themselves inside me. This is not coincidence. I did not say it out loud. I did not need to. My body had already accepted it before my mind finished forming the sentence. And the pen wasn't sitting loose on the desk. It rested inside a shallow groove, fitted, not placed. The wood around it was worn just enough to suggest repetition, not age. Not something someone picked up absent-mindedly, something you either knew or ignored. My fingers hesitated over it, because suddenly it didn't feel like a desk anymore. It felt arranged. My thumb traced the engraving once, lightly, as if touching it too firmly might wake something. The pen was warm now from my hand, heavier than it should have been, not broken, not worn down by a child's use, preserved, kept. A sickness moved through me then, low and cold. I turned it over again and noticed the cap didn't sit quite right. Not visibly wrong, just resistant, like it was waiting for pressure, not handling. I should have put it down. I should have walked out of the house, got back in my car, and driven straight to wherever panic takes sensible women when their lives stop fitting the story they have been told. Instead, I held the pen, the way Layla used to, pinched between my fingers with too much tenderness, and pressed the cap with my thumb. A soft click answered me. Not from the pen alone. From somewhere beneath the desk. I froze. For one long second, nothing happened, and I nearly convinced myself I had imagined the sound. Then a faint vibration traveled through the wood into my fingertips. Not a rattle. Not the loose tremor of bad construction. Something controlled. Something that had been built to respond. The lamp on the desk gave the slightest shiver. Somewhere to my left, beyond the hall, I heard it. A quiet internal shift. Metal moving against metal. Measured. Deliberate. Like a system waking up after being asked the right question. I turned slowly. At the far end of the hall, the wall beside the locked storage area had begun to move. Not fast, not violently. It slid back with the calm certainty of something that had done this before. My body understood before my mind allowed it to. I did not move at first. I stood in that hallway with the pen still in my hand and watched the wall finish sliding back like it had nothing to hide from me, like it belonged to the house as naturally as any other door. The opening behind it was narrow and dark at first, the light inside so low it did not spill properly into the hall. My feet stayed where they were. My chest did not. My heart had already started beating with the hard, ugly rhythm of something that recognizes danger before the rest of you catches up. The air changed before I stepped closer, stale, closed up, not just unused, but held. I remember that most clearly. Not fear, not shock, the smell. Air that had not been allowed to belong to the world outside. It came through the opening with the faint, dry edge of dust, old fabric, and something medicinal underneath. It was the smell of a place built to keep time from behaving normally. I should have called out. I should have said Layla's name right then. I should have done something loud enough to prove I was still the kind of mother who knew how to break a moment open. Instead, I moved forward in silence, one hand dragging lightly against the wall beside me, like I needed the house itself to confirm I was still upright. And the room was smaller than I expected and deeper than it had any right to be. Not a basement, not a cellar. More like a hidden chamber built into the back structure of the house, narrow and controlled, with one low bed against the far wall, a small sink, a shelf, and a lamp fixed high enough that it cast light downward without warming anything. There were no windows. The walls were finished, painted, maintained. That was what made it worse. This was not panic construction, not something thrown together in a night. Somebody had planned this, measured it, built it to last long enough for forgetting to begin. At first, I did not see her face. I saw knees drawn up under a thin blanket, bare feet, ankles too narrow, a shoulder moving under fabric that hung wrong on the body beneath it. Then the shape on the bed shifted, and the room narrowed down to one impossible thing at the center of it, Layla. My body moved before I could think, one step, then I stopped, because she flinched, not startled, not confused, conditioned. That single movement held more information than anything else in the room. Her eyes lifted toward me and then dropped almost immediately, like looking directly at another person had become unsafe. I could see it in the tightening of her shoulders, in the way her fingers gripped the blanket, in the way her body angled not toward escape, but inward, toward itself. Fear had taught her to make herself smaller. My body wanted to close the distance. Every instinct I had was screaming to take her, to pull her out of that room, to carry her out of that house without looking back. No, but she wasn't reaching for me. She was shrinking away from me, and something in me understood, fast and hard. If I moved the wrong way, I could lose her again, not physically, but here, where she still was. Layla, I whispered, and my own voice sounded wrong in the room. Too alive, too late. No answer. Her breathing changed, quick, shallow. She kept staring at a place near my arm instead of my face. I lowered myself slowly, not toward her, just lower, reducing the space between us without advancing into it. "I'm here," I said, softer this time. "I'm not going anywhere." Her fingers tightened around the blanket. Her shoulders stayed locked, but she didn't pull back further. That was something. Seconds passed, maybe longer. Time had gone strange. Her eyes lifted once more, met mine for the briefest moment, then slipped away again. Shame lives inside children differently than it does inside grown people. In her, it looked taut. When she finally spoke, it was so soft I almost thought I had imagined it. He said, she swallowed hard, tried again. He said, "You stopped looking." Everything in me went cold. I opened my mouth to answer. And then a sound moved through the house above us. A door, not in the hallway with me. Upstairs, opening. Every instinct told me to grab her. Survival told me not to. That is the part people judge when they have never stood inside a moment that can still get worse. Because the truth is, the second I saw her, I did move. Not forward, but inside myself, fast enough to understand what I was standing in. I saw my daughter, I heard her voice, and in that same breath, I saw the room for what it actually was, not hiding, control. The bed wasn't temporary, the blanket wasn't random, the lamp wasn't placed for comfort, it was placed for visibility, the sink, the shelf, the spacing. Everything had been measured, repeated, maintained. This had not lasted a year by accident. This was a system, and systems don't survive disruption. They punish it. Upstairs, the sound came again, not loud, not rushed, measured. A man moving through a space he believed belonged to him. That was when the second truth settled in, cold and immediate. I was not alone in that house long enough to make a mistake. Layla had already pulled back from me. That mattered more than anything. Her body had not leaned toward me. It had closed in on itself. If I rushed her, if I crossed that space too quickly, if I touched her before she understood what was happening, she could panic. She could cry out. She could do exactly what fear had taught her to do when something changed too fast. And if she made a sound, if anything in that room shifted out of pattern, if he came down those stairs and saw even the smallest difference, then whatever chance I had just found would end in front of me. Not later, right there. I saw it clearly, not as fear, as sequence. He built this place to notice change. He would see the blanket moved. He would see the air disturbed. He would see her different. And then he would adapt, move her, hide her deeper, or worse, remove the problem completely. My body wanted to fall beside that bed. My body wanted to take her face in my hands and force the world back into something that made sense. And I wanted to hold her and tell her I had never stopped. Not once. Not in the ways that matter. Not in the parts of me that had gone quiet just to survive. I wanted to pick her up and run, but that would have been about me, not her. I looked at her again. Her eyes were fixed somewhere near the floor, shoulders tight, breath small. Like hope itself had become something dangerous in that room. That nearly broke me. Not her fear, her caution. A child that young should not know how to measure safety before reaching for her own mother. "Don't move," I whispered. And I hated myself the second the words left my mouth because they sounded like him. Her gaze flickered upward, uncertain, searching my face for something she didn't yet trust enough to believe. I forced myself to step back before she could see what was breaking in mine. And this only works if he doesn't know I know. The wall remained open beside me, waiting. Upstairs, the sound came again, closer this time. A shift of weight, wood under pressure, a step placed without hurry. He wasn't running. He didn't need to. That was worse. Panic had to become performance. I backed out of the room slowly, every movement deliberate, controlled, unnatural in its calm. My hand found the pen again, but my fingers no longer felt like mine. For a second, I thought I would drop it. The gold clip flashed between my grip as if it had its own pulse. I pressed where I remembered. The mechanism answered. Soft. Precise. The wall began to slide. Not fast, never fast. Even concealment here had been taught patience. I watched it close, inch by inch, until the opening narrowed, then disappeared, then became nothing at all. A wall. A clean, uninterrupted wall. No seam. No truth. I set the pen back exactly where I had found it. Not near it. Exactly. Because men like him don't check for presence. They check for difference. Then I turned and walked through that house. Steady. Measured. My knees felt unreliable beneath me. My mouth had gone dry enough to hurt. And still, I noticed everything. The shine on the faucet, the stillness of the curtain, the way the air held itself too carefully inside those rooms. The house looked right again. That was the lie. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The world outside had not changed. That offended me. I made it to the car before my body gave out on me. The keys slipped once, hit the side panel, and dropped into the dirt. I stared at them longer than I should have. Like I had forgotten what they were for. Then I bent, picked them up, missed the lock twice, got inside, shut the door. My breathing didn't come back. Not fast, not slow. Gone. Like my body had decided air was something it would return to later. I gripped the steering wheel and sat there for a second that felt longer than it was. If I made the wrong move, I wouldn't lose him. I'd lose her again. I started the engine, backed out carefully. Too carefully for a woman whose entire life had just split open, and drove away from the farmhouse with both hands locked in place. But I did not turn toward home. I didn't call the police. I called someone who understood controlled damage. I had already dialed emergency services once and failed them both. That happened less than 5 minutes after I left the farm. I pulled onto the shoulder half a mile down the road because the trees had started bending strangely in my vision, like the world itself had loosened at the edges, and I knew I could not keep driving blind with panic. My hand found my phone before my breathing found rhythm. I pressed the numbers without thinking. When the dispatcher answered, I heard a woman's voice say, "911, what is your emergency?" and opened my mouth to tell her my daughter was alive in a room behind a wall in my husband's farmhouse. Nothing came out, not a scream, not a word, not even her name. I hung up and stared at the screen until it went black. Then I did what women like me do when the truth is too large to carry emotionally and too dangerous to handle carelessly. I reached for the one person I trusted to think clearly when I no longer could. Then Nadine Baxter answered on the second ring. Her voice was exactly what it always was, calm without being soft, alert without sounding alarmed. "Thelma?" I swallowed twice before I could speak. "I need to see you." A pause. Not long, just long enough to measure me. "Where are you?" I gave her the name of a small medical office parking lot 20 minutes outside town, the kind of place that stayed half empty after lunch and looked private without attracting attention. I do not remember the drive there. I remember stopping at one red light and realizing I had no memory of the two before it. Nadine was already there when I pulled in, standing beside her car in a cream blouse and dark trousers. One hand holding her phone, the other resting near the strap of her bag. She did not wave. Now she looked at my face once and opened the passenger door of her car instead. "Come sit where it's cooler," she said. I got in. The leather seat felt too smooth beneath me, too civilized for what I'd just seen. Nadine slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and let the quiet settle first. She had represented my late husband's estate years ago and stayed close enough afterward to become something rarer than a lawyer. Someone who knew what money did to people when grief loosened the hinges of a family. She was not warm in the ordinary sense. She was reliable. There are times in a woman's life when that matters more. "What happened?" she asked. I told her. Not beautifully, not in order at first. The farm, the pen, the wall, Layla, the room, the way my child had looked at the floor instead of at me, the upstairs sound, or the closing of the wall, my own cowardice, though Nadine interrupted that word so quickly it cut clean through me. "That was not cowardice," she said. It felt like it. It was containment. I turned to look at her then. She wasn't trying to comfort me. She was naming the thing correctly. That steadied me more than kindness would have. When I finished, she asked only practical questions. Had Preston seen me? No. Did I touch anything besides the pen? The desk edge? Maybe the wall? Did Layla speak? Yes. One sentence. Did the room look temporary? No. Did it look accidental? No. Nadine sat back and exhaled through her nose. Her eyes had changed by then, not wider, not shocked, just sharpened. "If this is what you think it is," she said, "why's we do this right or we don't do it at all?" I pressed both palms against my knees to stop them shaking. "She's in there." "I know." "He could move her." "He could," she said, "which is why panic is not a plan." I stared through the windshield at a faded, handicapped parking sign and tried to stop seeing Layla's wrists. Nadine reached for her phone, then stopped before dialing. "If he built something like that," she said carefully, "then he planned for interruption, which means he may also be watching for it." My head turned slowly toward her. "You mean cameras?" "I mean anything," she said. "Entry points, movement, changes in routine. If uniformed officers show up at that property without preparation and he sees it before they reach her." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I felt it land anyway. "She disappears," I said quietly. Nadine held my gaze. Or worse. Silence filled the car. Then she continued, steady and precise. "We don't call this in blind. Not yet." I swallowed. "So we wait?" "No," she said. "We control how this begins." She leaned slightly toward me, voice lowering, not emotional, just exact. "I'm going to bring in someone who knows how to walk into a situation like this without announcing it. Not police yet. Someone who understands surveillance, entry, and containment." I stared at her. "You have someone like that?" "I know people who used to do that kind of work," she said. "And more importantly, I know how to keep this from turning into something he can outrun." My hands tightened together. "I already lost a year." "And you will lose the rest of her," she said evenly. If you give him warning." That landed the way it was meant to. Not cruel. Correct. I nodded once. Nadine unlocked her phone again, this time without hesitation. "We build this properly," she said. "Evidence first, control second, then we bring it to the people who can end it clean." She glanced at me one more time, making sure I understood the weight of what came next. "We build a case before we touch him." For the first time, I stopped grieving that day and started investigating it. Nadine did not let me go home with my fear and call it caution. She took me to her office instead. Not the front conference room with the polished table and framed degrees meant to reassure people with ordinary legal trouble. And she led me into the smaller room at the back where she reviewed estate disputes and family claims that had already learned how ugly money could get. There were no windows in that room, just a lamp, a legal pad, 2 glasses of water, and the kind of quiet that forces a woman to hear herself think. "Start from the morning," she said. "Not the pain, the sequence." That distinction changed everything. Until then, September 5th had lived inside me like weather. The call from the school, the sirens, the driver bleeding. Layla gone. I remembered it as impact, as collapse. Nadine made me lay it out as movement, time, root, people, decisions. And once I did that, grief stopped looking like fog and started showing me shapes. Layla had stayed after school that day for choir practice. That part was ordinary. Did Calvin always pick her up from the side gate because dismissal traffic at the main entrance was a mess by 3:30? He had driven her for nearly 2 years by then. Same sedan, same school route, same timing, unless weather or road work forced a change. Preston had been out of town that week, attending what he called a farm equipment expo 2 states over. I remembered that because he had apologized for missing Layla's piano check-in the night before, and because I had defended him to her when she rolled her eyes and said, "He's always gone when things are boring." At the time, it sounded like a child complaining. Now it sounded like a line I should have held longer. Nadine wrote dates and times while I spoke. Her face stayed neutral, but she circled things quietly. How long from school to home? 23 minutes. Maybe 25 with traffic. And that day? I closed my eyes, not to dramatize anything, but because memory still answered better in darkness. Longer, 40 maybe. Because of the attack. You thought that after. What was the reason given at the time? I opened my eyes. A detour. She looked up. Detour for what? I could not answer immediately. That bothered me. I had lived inside this story for more than a year. I had repeated it to detectives, officers, relatives, reporters, neighbors, pastors, and to myself in the shower when no one could hear the shame in my voice. A detour, that was always the word. Clean, simple, finished. But for what? Road work, maybe. Traffic backup, a downed utility line. I could not remember anyone giving me the actual reason, to only that Calvin had taken a side road near an undeveloped stretch 2 miles east of the usual route, and that was where the vehicle forced them off. Nadine underlined something once. Call Calvin. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding older than I remembered, which grief and injury will do to a person even when they survive both. When I said my name, his voice changed immediately. Mrs. Varel. I had not heard him call me that since the hospital. I need you to tell me about that day, I said. Everything you remember. Not what the police wrote down, what you remember. He was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he let out a breath that sounded scraped raw. I remember thinking they were waiting. Nadine looked up sharply but said nothing. What do you mean? I asked. It didn't feel like chance, Calvin said. Not even then. The SUV came in too clean, too direct, like they already knew where we'd be coming from. He paused. And ma'am, I took that side road because I got a call. My grip tightened on the phone. From who? I never knew. Number was blocked. Man said there'd been a wreck ahead and school traffic was backed halfway to the highway. Said he was calling from dispatch. Sounded official enough for me to move. Nadine was writing now without looking at the page. What happened after you turned? She asked quietly, and I repeated the question aloud. Calvin swallowed. I could hear it. They hit us from the side near the empty lots. One man at my door, one at the back. I reached for Layla, and that's when I got shot. Hand, clean through. I remember screaming at her to get down. His voice thinned. I thought it was robbery, too, at first. That's what everybody kept saying. But they didn't take my wallet, didn't take the car, didn't touch my watch. The room went still. What did the police do with that? I asked. A bitter little laugh came through the line. They wrote it up as a roadside robbery gone wrong. Said trauma makes memory unreliable. After a while, nobody wanted a complicated answer when a simple one could close a file. Nadine held my gaze then, and in hers I saw the thing she had not yet spoken aloud. I said it first. Someone planned that day. Love doesn't blind you. It edits what you're willing to question. That was the part I hated most once the shape of him began to change in my mind. Not that I had loved the wrong man. Women survive that every day. It was that I had mistaken management for steadiness, timing for loyalty, and patience for goodness, because grief had made me hungry for anything that felt consistent. When my first husband died, the house filled the way houses do. After a death people think they have prepared for and never truly have. Food arrived in foil pans. Voices lowered themselves automatically. Men stood in corners discussing arrangements in tones that pretended not to be about money. Women hugged too long or not long enough. Through all of it, Preston was there. Not loudly. That would have raised alarms. He did useful things. He handled visitors when I could no longer smile through them. He drove my aunt back to her hotel after she cried in my kitchen and started talking about signs from God in a way that made Layla afraid to come downstairs. And he made sure the grass got cut. He brought groceries without asking what I needed, which at the time felt merciful because I had stopped knowing. When the casserole stopped coming and everyone else returned to their proper lives, Preston kept appearing with quiet consistency. A hardware fix, a school pickup, a pharmacy run, a tire replaced before I even remembered saying it looked low. Back then, I called it kindness. Sitting in Nadine's office with September 5th spread across legal paper between us, I had to call it something else. Entry. "He was your husband's friend first," Nadine said. "Yes." "How close?" "Close enough to come by without calling, not close enough that I ever imagined." I stopped there. The sentence did not deserve finishing in that room. Nadine tapped her pen once. "Tell me how he became necessary." There are questions that feel insulting until you realize they are precise. I looked down at my hands. He never asked for much at once. That was true. Men like Preston do not lunge. They arrange. The first year after my husband died, he made himself useful in ways no one could criticize. The second year, he became familiar enough that his presence no longer needed explaining. By the third, Layla called him before I did if something went wrong with the Wi-Fi or the back gate or the battery in the smoke detector outside her room. By the fourth, people had stopped saying his full name when they mentioned him. He had become Preston, like weather, like plumbing. Like some fixture of our lives that had always been there. I remembered one Sunday afternoon more clearly than the others because it had felt tender at the time and ugly now. Layla had fallen asleep on the couch after church, still in her little yellow dress, one shoe missing. I was in the kitchen trying to make myself eat something besides crackers when Preston came in through the side door carrying a sack of peaches from a roadside stand. "You need fresh fruit in this house," he said. I laughed. "You say that every time." And every time I'm right. He rinsed the peaches at the sink like he belonged there, not arrogantly, comfortably. Then he looked toward the living room where Layla was sleeping and lowered his voice. "You don't have to keep proving you can do all of this alone." At the time, I nearly cried from gratitude. Now I hear the sentence differently, not as comfort, or as placement. A hand on the frame before the foot crosses the threshold. The farm changed too, once I was inside his life enough to be redirected by it. In the early years, he invited me out there now and then. Sunday lunch on the porch, a drive out to see the property after rain. Nothing heavy, enough to create the impression of openness. But after we married, his language shifted in ways so minor I could have missed them forever if the wall had never opened. "It's too muddy today. You'll ruin your shoes. No point dragging all the way out there for paperwork. You hate the smell after they fertilize. Stay in town. I'll be back by dinner." He always made exclusion sound like care, and I let him. Not because I was foolish, because by then I had already confused relief with trust. And a woman who has buried one husband and is trying to raise a daughter under the shadow of that loss will sometimes accept peace in whatever shape it comes. Preston understood that before I did. Nadine watched me quietly while I walked myself back through 10 years of managed access, softened boundaries, and favors offered before they were requested. "He isolated you politely," she said. "Yes." "And the farm?" I looked at her then and felt the truth settle into place with a weight that made me sit straighter instead of smaller. He didn't enter my life, I said. He positioned himself inside it. This time, I didn't go there as a wife. I went as a witness. Nadine would not let me return to the property alone, and she would not let me return carelessly. By the next evening, and the farm had become something else entirely in my mind, not a place tied to marriage, routine, or weather, but a location with habits, a system. And once you stop looking at a place emotionally, patterns begin to rise out of it like bones under thin ground. We parked 2 roads over just after sunset in an older sedan Nadine had borrowed from an investigator she trusted enough not to ask foolish questions too early. From where we sat, we could not see the front of the farmhouse directly, only the side approach and the edge of the equipment path that curved behind it. That was enough. The rest, Nadine said, was timing. The field beyond us darkened by degrees. Tree lines thickened. The sky lost color slowly, then all at once. I had never realized how different silence sounded when you were waiting for proof. In grief, silence can feel holy. Or in suspicion, it feels occupied. Preston's truck was already there. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then a light came on near the back section of the house, not in the kitchen, not in the upstairs bedroom, but lower and farther in, where the structure widened toward the storage side. It stayed on for 12 minutes exactly. Nadine checked the time without making a show of it. Then it went dark. 20 minutes later, it came back. "Not normal use," she said softly. I kept my eyes on the house. No. A man living alone on a working farm might move around at odd hours. I knew that. But the movement here did not feel casual. Nothing about Preston felt casual anymore. The light came and went with the rhythm of a task. Not dinner, not restlessness, not absent-minded wandering. Something repeated, something checked. Just after 9, another truck came through the side entrance and stopped near the outbuilding path. A man got out carrying a toolbox in one hand and a paper sack in the other. He was broad-shouldered, maybe late 30s, work boots, cap pulled low. He did not go to the front porch. He headed around the side, disappeared from view for a few minutes, then came back empty-handed. Preston met him only near the truck, never inviting him farther in than necessary. "That's not one of the regular supply men," I said. Nadine watched him leave. "You know his face? I've seen him before, around the property. Not often." The next morning, we got a name. Luis Herrera had done odd repair work and seasonal labor on the farm off and on for nearly 3 years. Nadine had one of her contacts place a quiet call to him, and then by noon, I was sitting in the back booth of a roadside diner, 2 towns over, while he turned a coffee cup slowly between his palms, like the heat in it might help him decide how honest to be. He recognized me immediately and looked ashamed before he had even said a word. "Mrs. Varel." I nodded. "Luis." He glanced toward the window, then back down. He had the look of a man who had explained away his own discomfort for too long and was beginning to suspect that was going to cost him. "I'm not here to get you in trouble," I said. "That usually means trouble is already here." It was not a disrespectful answer, just tired. True. Nadine sat beside me but let me lead. "Tell me what parts of that house you work in." Luis shook his head. "Not the house. Outside only, mostly. Fencing, pump lines, some electrical in the shed. Drainage after storms." "Have you ever been inside?" "Front room once, maybe twice. Never past the hall." "Why not?" He hesitated. Mr. Mercer was particular. "About what?" "About that side section." He set the cup down carefully. "Storage area, back wall, anything near there. If I needed tools from inside, he brought them out himself. If something needed fixing near that part of the house, suddenly it could wait." I felt my pulse change, but kept my face still. "Did you ever hear anything?" I asked. Luis looked at me then, not casually, directly, like he had reached the point where lying would require more effort than truth. At night, sometimes. He swallowed. Not clear, just sounds that didn't fit. Movement. Once I thought maybe a radio was on low. Another time I heard what I figured was pipes knocking. But it wasn't cold enough for that. He paused, then added something he had not meant to say. That section of the house, it's older than the rest. Nadine leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? Luis rubbed his hands together once before answering. Used to be cold storage, before renovations, thick walls, no shared vents with the main house. Doesn't carry sound the same way. The air around the table shifted. No one goes near that corridor, he said quietly. Not unless he's there. Nadine did not interrupt. I thought about the hidden room, the measured light, the wall that moved too smoothly to be recent, and the way everything in that farmhouse had felt arranged long before I understood why. By the time we left that diner, I knew something with a terrible certainty. That room wasn't new. Well, it wasn't even built for her. It was built for something that needed to stay unheard. Money doesn't lie. It just waits. By the time Nadine set the estate binder in front of me, I already knew my marriage had been built inside something I hadn't fully seen. What I didn't know yet was how long that something had been waiting for the right moment to matter. The conference room felt different from the others, not colder, more deliberate. Papers covered the table, but not in chaos. Everything had a place. Copies of the will, trust language, asset schedules, letters my first husband had signed while his body was failing and his mind was still doing the work of protecting us from a future he knew he wouldn't be there to manage. Nadine had taken off her jacket. That was how I knew we were past politeness. I need you to walk through this with me, she said, not listen. Walk through. I nodded, but my eyes stayed on the binder. My first husband's name sat on the tab like something that had been waiting years for me to come back and read it properly. Nadine opened it. When your husband died, she said, he didn't leave everything to you outright. I didn't look up. I know, I said. Not exactly how, but I've been living inside it. That's the problem, she said quietly. You've been living inside the result, not the structure. She turned the first page and slid it toward me. Read that line. I leaned forward. Primary control granted to surviving spouse during minority of beneficiary. The words felt familiar without ever having been fully understood. What does that mean? I asked. It means you were allowed to manage everything, she said, not own everything. I sat back slightly. That's a difference I should have noticed. It's a difference most people don't, she said, until someone forces them to. She tapped further down the page. Keep going. I read slower this time. Restricted transfer of protected assets requires beneficiary participation upon majority or certified proof of death. My eyes stopped there. Not skimmed, stopped. I read it again. Then once more. Say it, Nadine said. I looked up at her. He couldn't get full control through me. No, not ever, not without her. The room didn't move. It settled. Everything I had been holding separately, Layla, the farm, the questions he used to ask, the quiet way he watched things, began to line up in a way that didn't ask for interpretation anymore. It explained itself. He was locked out, I said. Yes. I looked back down at the page, but I wasn't reading anymore. I was seeing. My daughter. Not just my child. A condition. A requirement. A gate. The one thing he couldn't move past without her. Something tightened in my chest. Not like grief this time. Like alignment. Nadine opened another file without breaking the rhythm. Now, look at this. She slid a series of notes toward me. Dates, questions, fragments of conversations. At first glance, they looked harmless. That was what made them dangerous. He made inquiries over the years, she said. Nothing aggressive, always framed as general planning, hypotheticals, curiosity. I scanned the lines. Keep trust disbursement timing, beneficiary rights upon delay, asset control under absence conditions. Absence. The word stayed. I circled it with my finger without thinking. When was this? I asked. 3 years ago. Before Layla disappeared. I didn't speak. Nadine didn't interrupt. She let me do the work of putting it together. He wasn't asking randomly, I said slowly. No. He was learning the edges. Yes. I leaned back in my chair, but there was no release in it, because now I could see the pattern behind the questions. Not curiosity, positioning. Another page slid toward me, a formal inquiry, carefully worded. Extended absence of minor beneficiary. I let out a breath I didn't remember holding. Unreachable, I said quietly. Nadine nodded once. That language matters. I stared at it. Not dead. Not lost. Unreachable. A condition. A window. A way to hold everything in place without closing the door. My hands went still. He didn't need her gone, I said. Nadine watched me closely now. No, she said. He needed her unavailable. The word landed heavier. Unavailable meant waiting, meant control, meant time. I looked down at the papers again, but something had already shifted inside me. This wasn't about money anymore, not in the way people like to simplify it. This was about access, and he had spent years studying how to get it. Why keep her alive? I asked. But this time I wasn't asking because I didn't know. I was asking because I needed to hear it said out loud. Because dead is immediate, Nadine said. Missing is useful. I closed my eyes for a second, not to escape it, to let it settle. Because everything in me had wanted this to be messier, jealousy, anger, something impulsive, something I could point to and say there. That's where he broke. But this wasn't breakage. This was patience. I opened my eyes again and looked at the binder, at my husband's careful handwriting preserved in legal language, at the structure he had built to protect us, and the man who had spent years learning how to move around it. He didn't lose control, I said. Nadine didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. I looked back down at the page one last time. He postponed it. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't uncertainty. It was understanding. Cruelty is loud. Control is patient. That was what finally separated Preston from the kind of men people recognize too late but still understand. Well, loud men leave evidence behind. Broken things, raised voices, bruises that force a story into daylight whether anyone wants to tell it or not. Preston left none of that. He built something quieter. We sat with the estate papers open between us, but neither of us was looking at them anymore. The answers were no longer on the page. They were already in the room. I had my phone in my hand, staring at one of Layla's school photos, one of the last proper ones before she vanished. Her hair was braided neatly, her head tilted just slightly, one eyebrow lifted like she was already halfway to questioning whatever adult had just spoken to her. I held the phone too tightly. If he only wanted access, I said, he could have tried to force something through me. Nadine shook her head. Not safely, she said, not with the structure in place. Too many records, too many people who would have had to sign off on it, too many chances for it to be noticed. So he took the one person he couldn't bypass. Yes. The word didn't land hard. It settled, because by then I could already feel what it meant. Not just what he had done, how he had done it. Keeping her hidden gave him time, Nadine said. I didn't look up. Time for what? For the structure to shift, she said. For you to weaken. For decisions to be made under pressure instead of clarity. For mistakes. Mistakes. That was what he had been waiting for. Not opportunity, Erosion. I thought about the room again, not the shock of it, the details. The lamp fixed high enough that it gave light without comfort, the bed positioned against the wall instead of near the center, and the shelf with only a few items, nothing that invited choice. The books. I hadn't understood them at first. Now I did. They were too young for her, not accidental, deliberate, keeping her below herself, below her age, below her ability to question. He told her I stopped looking, I said. Nadine didn't hesitate. He told her whatever kept her from expecting you. That was the part that changed everything. Not the room, not the wall, her eyes, the way she hadn't reached for me, the way she had measured me, like I was something she needed to be careful with. I closed my eyes and saw it again. Her shoulders tight, her voice small, her body angled inward, not toward escape, but toward survival. She wasn't just hidden, I said. Nadine stayed quiet. She was being trained. That word sat differently in the air, because it carried method, repetition, adjustment. I opened my eyes. He controlled what she heard, I said, what she saw, when she spoke, when she ate, when she slept. Nadine nodded once. He controlled her version of reality. I thought about that. No windows, no clocks, no outside voices, no one to contradict him. A child does not need chains if the world itself is reduced to one person. He didn't need to hurt her every day, I said slowly. No, Nadine said, just enough to set the rules. And then, consistency. That was the part that made it hold. Enough food to keep her alive, enough silence to make her careful, enough presence to make him necessary, not kindness, stability, manufactured. I stood up without realizing I had decided to move. The window didn't offer anything worth seeing, just the parking lot. On a row of cars, the dull shine of late afternoon, but I needed something outside of my own head. A year, I said. My voice sounded steady, too steady. He fed her, spoke to her, watched her change. I paused and adjusted. Nadine didn't interrupt. And all that time, I continued, he came home to me. Yes. That word landed differently this time, not sharp, heavy, because it carried two realities at once. The man who sat across from me at dinner, and the man who walked into that room every day. He hadn't switched between them. He had learned how to be both. I placed my hand against the glass, grounding myself in something that didn't move. This wasn't something he lost control of, I said. No, Nadine answered. This wasn't something that got out of hand. No. I turned back toward her. By then, and whatever had been uncertain in me was gone, not replaced with anger, with clarity. He didn't break her, I said. Nadine held my gaze. No, she said quietly. He contained her. That was worse, because breaking someone is chaos. It leaves marks. It leaves noise. Containment is discipline. It requires attention, adjustment, restraint. It requires a man willing to watch a child change and decide every day to keep going. I nodded once. This wasn't survival, I said. Nadine didn't look away. No. I let the silence sit for a second longer, then finished it. This was design. The first time, I was a mother. The second time, I was evidence. That difference sat inside my body like a second spine. Nadine did not let the plan breathe long enough to become fear. By the following afternoon, now she had done what precise women do when panic threatens to ruin good judgment. She narrowed the world down to sequence. Preston had a standing pattern on Thursdays. Late morning supply stop, brief return to the farm, then an hour and a half at the south field with 2 equipment men who came twice a month and never entered the house. Nadine had verified that much through calls made in tones that sounded harmless to the people answering them. A retired investigator she trusted drove separately and stayed off the property line. No sirens, no uniforms yet. Not until the room was opened again and documented properly. The house looked exactly the same in daylight as it had the day before. That offended me all over again. From the outside, nothing about it confessed. The porch was swept. The windows were clean. The hedges held their shape. And a place can look respectable and still be built around horror. I understood that now more deeply than I wanted to. We entered through the front the same way I had before, except this time I was not pretending my instincts were grief. Nadine moved behind me with the contained stillness of a woman who had already decided that whatever she found, she would not give it the satisfaction of seeing her startled. In the hall, the air felt normal until it didn't. That slight, stale undertone returned the closer we got to the desk. "Take me through exactly what you did," she said. I picked up the pen. Even that felt different now. Not sacred this time, not shocking, functional. A key disguised as sentiment. My thumb found the cap. Click. The mechanism answered beneath the desk with that same subtle release, or in the wall began to slide back with calm, measured obedience. Nadine took out her phone and started recording before the opening had fully widened. The room beyond looked smaller in daylight and worse in truth. The low bed, the fixed lamp, the shelf, the sink, the careful cruelty of maintenance. I had missed something the first time, overwhelmed by Layla's face. On the shelf, beside a plastic cup and a folded towel, sat 3 paperback books for children, too young for the girl now sitting on that bed. Not entertainment, containment. A way to keep a child suspended below her age, below her power, below herself. Layla was there, knees drawn up again, though this time she looked toward the opening faster, as if the sound of the wall had become part of whatever rhythm controlled her days. When her eyes landed on me, and I saw recognition begin as doubt, I stepped in slowly. No sudden movement, no reaching, no flood of words. I had learned enough by then to understand that love can become another threat if it arrives too quickly in a room built on fear. "It's me," I said softly. "Baby, it's me." Her breathing changed first, then her mouth. Her lower lip trembled once before she pressed it inward hard, like she had learned tears were expensive. Nadine remained just behind me, still recording, still silent. I moved one step closer and stopped. "I came back," I told her. Layla's eyes searched my face with the fragile concentration of someone trying to match a living person to a memory that had been tampered with. She looked older than 12 and younger than it too. Time had not moved through her cleanly in that room. Then, why so quietly, I had to lean to hear it, she said, "I thought you stopped looking." The sentence broke somewhere behind my ribs, but I did not let it show on my face. This was not the moment for my grief. It was the moment for her truth. "I never stopped," I said. "Not one day." Her shoulders shook once, not a sob. More like her body had forgotten how to trust relief and was trying to reject it before it could do damage. I saw then what I had not been able to carry the first time, that she wanted to believe me, but belief itself had become dangerous to her. Nadine spoke for the first time, her tone low and even. "Layla, my name is Nadine Baxter. I'm here with your mother. You are safe right now." Right now. Careful words, honest ones. I took another step, and then we all heard it. Footsteps outside. He didn't panic. He observed. That was how I knew, with a clarity colder than fear, that the man I had married had been preparing for consequences longer than I had been preparing for truth. The footsteps stopped just outside the hall. No rushed breath, no dropped tools, no curse under his breath from being interrupted in the middle of some ordinary farm task. Just stillness on the other side of the room, as if Preston Mercer had reached the doorway and immediately understood that the air inside his house had changed. Nadine lowered her phone only slightly, keeping it ready. Behind us, the investigator near the front entry had already moved into position the moment he heard the truck door outside, but no one rushed in yet. That had been part of the plan. Let him enter, let him see, let him choose. Then the first thing I saw was his shadow reaching the hallway before he did. Then Preston stepped into view. He wore the same denim shirt he had left home in that morning, sleeves rolled once at the forearms, a dust mark near one shoulder, boots carrying a faint line of dried dirt across the floorboards. Ordinary. That was the insult of him. A man could hold horror under his roof and still arrive looking like somebody's husband returning from work. His eyes found me first. Not Layla, not Nadine, me. And in that one glance, I watched him start calculating, not denying, not collapsing, measuring. How much did I know? How much had I seen? How many steps had I taken since leaving the farm the day before? Whether the room was still a secret or already a case. He looked at Nadine next, then at the open wall, and then finally into the room where Layla sat rigid on the bed with both hands gripping the blanket. Even then, he did not raise his voice. "Thelma," he said, as if I had wandered somewhere inconvenient. I did not answer. He took 2 slow steps forward. Nadine shifted her stance just enough to make clear he would not pass through her cleanly if he tried. He noticed. Of course he did. Preston noticed everything that mattered to him. His gaze moved once around the hall again. The desk, the pen in my hand, the open chamber, the phone recording. A tiny muscle near his jaw tightened and released. Then, with a calmness so complete it made my skin turn cold, he walked past me toward the wall. I thought, for one wild second, that he might try to shut it. Instead, he reached out and touched the inner edge of the mechanism with the familiarity of a man laying his hand on something he had built into his own daily life. Not lovingly, proprietarily. He looked into the room as if checking whether it was all still there. Then his mouth shifted. Not a smile, never that obvious. Something smaller. Recognition without surprise. "So," he said softly, "you found it." The sentence landed harder than any denial would have. From the front of the house came the sound of movement, firm shoes crossing wood, one voice identifying itself, another following, controlled and official. Only then did Preston straighten fully. He did not turn fast, he did not flinch. He simply removed his hand from the wall and faced the hall like a man preparing to negotiate weather. The 2 officers entered with the investigator behind them. No sirens, no dramatic shouting, just presence. One moved toward Layla's room immediately with careful attention, while the other stayed focused on Preston. "Preston Mercer," the officer said. "Step away from the wall and keep your hands where I can see them." Preston obeyed. That was almost worse. No argument. No sudden performance of outrage. No demand to know what this looked like. He lifted his hands slowly, eyes moving not to the officers, but back to me. In them I saw the same terrible thing I had seen in every chapter of my marriage now rewritten correctly. Not remorse, not fear, but active thought. He was still inside the game, still testing exits, still sorting people into useful and dangerous. Layla made a small sound behind me then, was something between a breath and a recoil, and for the first time Preston's expression changed. Not guilt, annoyance. That was when the last soft part of me finished dying. The officer stepped closer, securing his wrists while reciting the words that turn a private evil into public record. Preston offered no resistance, but as they guided him back, he turned his head slightly, just enough for his voice to reach me without carrying to the others. "You should have stayed home," he said. I held his gaze. He didn't resist, but he was still thinking. Truth didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in rooms. The first room was quiet. Nadine's office had taken on a different kind of stillness by then. Not the calm of order, but the kind that forms when everyone inside it understands something irreversible has already begun. On papers were spread across the table in front of me, but no one rushed to explain them. That was the first change. No one was managing my reaction anymore. They were letting me see. A detective stood near the edge of the table, flipping open a file with the careful patience of someone who knew the weight of each page mattered more than the speed of turning it. "We're going to walk through this step by step," he said. Not gentle, not harsh, just controlled. Nadine didn't look at me. She was watching him instead. "Start with the call," she said. He nodded and slid a photograph across the table. A grainy still image, gas station camera, timestamp in the corner. An SUV angled just enough toward the pump to make out the front plate, though not clearly enough for certainty. "This was pulled about 2 hours before your daughter was taken," he said. I leaned forward without realizing it. The image didn't look like much. That was the problem. Nothing about it demanded attention. Nothing about it would have made a person remember it later. "It matches the vehicle description from the scene," he continued. "We're enhancing the plate now, but that's not the part that matters most." He flipped another page. Payment was made in cash. Inside the station, prepaid phone purchased, same time window. I felt something tighten behind my ribs. "Burner?" I asked. "Yes." "Used to call Calvin?" "That's what we're working to confirm." Working. Still careful. Still controlled. But the shape of it had already begun to settle. This wasn't random. He turned another page. "This came in this morning." He didn't slide it right away. He held it for half a second longer than the others, just long enough to signal that this one carried weight. Then he placed it in front of me. A statement. Typed, signed. I didn't read the name first. I read the words. "Was told it was a roadside scare. Pickup only. No harm." My fingers pressed against the paper before I realized I had moved them. "What is this?" I asked. Nadine answered this time. "One of his seasonal workers," she said. "They had a disagreement recently. Money. He decided to talk." I lifted my eyes. "He knew about Layla." "No," Nadine said. "He knew about the job." The word landed differently the second time. Job. Not accident, not mistake. Arrangement. The detective pointed to a section halfway down the page. He was given instructions. Location, timing, approach, and one rule that was repeated more than once. I already knew what he was going to say. I didn't want to hear it. The girl was not to be harmed. The room didn't react. No one shifted. No one spoke. They were watching me instead. I looked back down at the paper. Not to protect her, to preserve her. That understanding moved through me slowly, like something cold finding its way into the center of my chest and deciding to stay there. Nadine spoke again, quieter this time. "That aligns with everything else we're seeing." I didn't answer, because I could see it now, not in theory, in structure. Every question he had asked over the years, every quiet inquiry, every moment I had mistaken curiosity for care. The detective slid another document forward. Financial inquiries, dates, notes. "Well, he asked about trust access multiple times," he said, framed differently each time. Estate planning, hypotheticals, contingencies. My hand stayed still in my lap. "And this," he added, tapping a line with his pen, "stood out." I leaned forward again. Extended absence of minor beneficiary. Absence, not death. Absence. I sat back slowly. "He didn't need her gone," I said. No one answered immediately. Then Nadine did. "No," she said. "He needed her unavailable." That word settled deeper. Unavailable. Not buried. Not mourned. Stored. The room shifted again. The detective closed that file and opened another. "This part is still developing," he said, "but you need to see it." He placed a pharmacy summary in front of me. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Dates, prescriptions, refill intervals. Then my eyes caught the pattern. Irregular pickups, not missed, moved. I looked up. "Why am I seeing this?" Nadine held my gaze. "Look at the pickup signatures." I did. The name repeated. Not mine. His, Preston, more than once. The air in the room thinned. "He accompanied your husband to several appointments," the detective said. "We've confirmed that with clinic staff. Nothing unusual at the time." Of course not. That was how he operated. Nothing unusual at the time. Another page. A note from a former employee. Another. A neighbor's statement. Another. A recovered email. What happens when a minor beneficiary outlives a terminal parent? I stopped reading. I didn't need more. The room had already finished assembling itself. This wasn't one plan, it was a sequence, positioning, timing, patience. I leaned back in my chair and stared at nothing for a moment, letting all of it settle into the only shape it could take now. Not confusion, not shock, understanding. He had not waited for opportunity. He had built toward it. Nadine's voice came again, steady, grounded. "This is enough to move forward," she said, "but more will come." I nodded once. I believed her, because I could see it now the way she did, not as scattered acts, as structure. By the time the detective gathered the files and the room began to empty, I understood something that sat heavier than anything else they had shown me. He had not simply taken my daughter. He had learned my life, mapped it, entered it where it was weakest, and waited where it was most useful. I sat there a moment longer after they were gone, on the papers still spread across the table like something unfinished, not incomplete, just still unfolding. Nadine didn't rush me. She stood by the window, giving me the kind of space that doesn't ask anything in return. After a while, I spoke. Not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly. "He didn't lose control," I said. She turned her head slightly. "No," she said. I looked down at the documents one last time. He postponed it. Silence settled between us again. Not empty this time, final. Because by then there was only one thing left in the entire room that still mattered. He had planned carefully, but not completely, because the one thing he had not accounted for was being seen. He took years. He didn't take what came after. People like to imagine rescue as a clean line. A door opens, a child is found, to an evil man is removed. The rest in that version is gratitude and tears and arms around each other in bright hospital light. That was not our story. Layla came back to the world slowly, like someone stepping barefoot onto ground she had been worn too long was unsafe. The first week after she was taken from the farmhouse, she spoke only when directly asked something simple, and even then her answers came thin and careful, as if every word still had to pass inspection before it could leave her mouth. She ate in small portions. She startled at ordinary sounds. She did not like closed doors. She did not like sudden movement. She did not like anyone standing over her, even nurses with soft voices and clean hands. At night, she slept in bursts. And sometimes she woke with her whole body rigid and eyes open before she fully understood where she was. I did not ask her for anything she was not ready to give me. That was the first real act of mothering I understood after she was found. Not claiming, not pleading, not trying to repair a year with the violence of love, just staying where she could see me and letting my presence mean only one thing. No one here will force you. Sometimes I sat by the window in her hospital room and read without turning the pages. Sometimes I peeled oranges I knew she would not eat yet, just to fill the room with a smell that belonged to ordinary life. Once, on the 5th day, she asked for water before the nurse came in, and the fact that she had asked me directly broke my heart more tenderly than any crying could have. Recovery did not arrive as closeness. It arrived as tolerance, then recognition, then, very slowly, a kind of quiet leaning. Preston was denied bond. I did not attend the hearing. Nadine handled the divorce the same way she handled everything else that mattered. Cleanly, with no appetite for theater. Emergency protections were granted within days. Access to shared accounts was frozen where necessary. Though the deeper truth was that most of what Preston had been circling all those years had never been his to reach. The trust was reinforced under court supervision. The farm was seized as part of the investigation long enough for its hidden architecture to become public record in exactly the way he would have hated most. Not through gossip, but through documentation. That was the only public part that mattered to me. Not scandal, on Not Whispers. Record. By then, people had started calling with the tone people use when they want proximity to a tragedy, without admitting that is what they are after. I ignored nearly all of them. I had no speech prepared, no statement, no appetite for explaining how a woman can sleep beside a man for years and still wake up beside a stranger one morning. The truth was simpler and less flattering to the world than people like. Evil does not always arrive red-eyed and obvious. Sometimes it comes bearing groceries, fixing broken gates, asking whether you've eaten, and standing just close enough to become part of your breathing before it begins rearranging your life around its own hunger. Layla came home 3 weeks later, not to celebration, not to balloons or banners or people crying in the foyer. And I would not turn her survival into a scene she had to perform her way through. Her room had been cleaned, but not changed. The yellow sweater still hung where it had always hung. The books stayed on the shelf. I let her enter first. She stood in the doorway for a long time, taking it in as if memory and reality were negotiating terms. Then she walked to the bed and sat down without speaking. I stayed near the door and let silence do what words could not. After a while, she looked up at me and said, "Did you keep it like this?" "Yes." She nodded once. Nothing dramatic, nothing healed. But she looked at me longer that time, and when I brought her dinner later, she let my hand rest briefly against her shoulder before she moved away. That was enough. Months passed, then more. The divorce finalized, the criminal case deepened, and the money stayed where it had always been meant to stay, protected from the man who had confused marriage with access and patience with ownership. I did not need to confront him again. The law, the records, the walls he built, and the room he maintained had already done the speaking for me. What remained was not triumph. It was clarity. He had taken my first husband. He had taken a year from my daughter. He had taken 10 years of my trust and worn them like a suit. But he did not take the ending. He built his life around what he thought I wouldn't see. What he never understood was this. Once I finally did, there was nothing left for him to hide behind.